It's a combat game, danger included, but instead of shooting with an AK-47, players use a video camera. The Brisbane-based video game studio Defiant Development has released the prototype of their combat game Warco, in which the protagonist is a journalist, her weapon is a video camera, and her objective is to capture the story the best she can. Players work their way through combat zones in the Middle East and Northern Africa, where they chase down leads, create stories, and broadcast their results with other players. I caught up with Defiant Development's founder Morgan Yaffet to ask him about the creation of the game, its objective, and how it can train new combat journalists. This is such a unique idea for a combat game. How did you come up with this?
So the original concept actually came from Tony Minetti, who has been a war journalist and currently teaches journalism in New South Wales in Australia. And he was looking at the possibilities of different ways of approaching journalism education and considered a training simulation and spoke to his friend Robert Connolly, who's a filmmaker, who started to talk about the possibilities of that actually as a game. And that's where they brought me into the mix, and we really fleshed out what the possibilities would be as both a commercial game, but something that's aimed at a bit more of a mature audience and a broader audience.
Now it looks just like playing a first-person war game, but you're completely defenseless. What's the objective? How do you win?
The goal at any point is to go in and get a good story. So what we do is we build interactive sandboxes in which there's a number of stories for you to collect in a limited amount of time and varying amounts of danger. Your goal is to decide what sort of story you want to collect, find the footage that enables you to edit that sort of story together, and get out and proceed to the next part of the game.
Now, you've described the game as about having to navigate through a morally gray world and making decisions that have human impact. Could you give me an example of one morally gray situation the player might have to work through?
So I think these are the questions that war journalists deal with on a daily basis. The question of whether to photograph somebody who's wounded or help them is the simplest sort of scenario that arises, and that's one that happens in a day-to-day consideration. But there's also the concerns of what sort of risks you want to take to get your story, what sort of news you want to present to the public, and how that might get back to the parties involved.
Can you describe the game's protagonist, Jessie DeMarco, and how you came up with her?
So Jessie grew out of the process of looking for the right character to be the window into this story, and we wanted somebody who was hard-edged enough to be convincing, but also clearly not a combatant, and that's effectively how we came to the process of Jessie. But really, we wanted to give players a character that felt exciting and powerful in the role of being a news gatherer, someone who was active and engaged and out there to grab the story, but also, as I say, somebody who clearly wasn't a combatant, somebody who's not going to pick up an AK-47 and start blasting away.
Now, you said the player is able to make a decision like choosing between photographing somebody who's wounded or helping them. What other decisions can the player make, and what else can Jessie do?
So right at the core is the decisions of what do you film. There's a little bit of that video that shows the introductory sequence where you arrive on the plane, and there's 3 or 4 different story threads that run through that environment that you can pick up on. So you might want to do a story that's primarily about the combat. You may want to do a story that's about the lives of the soldiers. You might want to do a story about the supplies that are coming in from NATO to supply the government troops. And you might want to do a human interest story that's about a woman who's lost her daughter. All of those elements are touched on in that space. And at every point in Warco, those decisions about the sort of story you craft are the fundamental underpinnings.
Are there any consequences or repercussions because of the choices the player makes?
To my mind, games are an interesting way to tell this sort of story because they can be consequential, because they can show the results of your actions. And we've spent a lot of time looking at the way the overall plot winds and turns back on itself in order to show you the results of the decisions you made, from interviews with child soldiers that might put them in danger to the information that you pass across, to the information that you broadcast and the way that's received, to the people that you help, to the questions that you ask. All of these have ongoing consequences through the narrative, and that's the most important part about the game to us.
You say on your website that players are able to share their stories with global audiences. What do you hope will come from players sharing their stories?
That's an interesting question. I think any time you go social, you open up an entire world of possibility. So the thing I'm hoping will come from us enabling players to share their story with other people is something that surprises me. I'm most delighted when a game or a product that we've produced enables a result that I didn't anticipate. And I think that's something that's going to come out of the editing and story building capacities that exist in Warco.
Right now, Japhet says he's in discussions with various publishers and has not yet set a release date for Warco. For War News Radio, I'm Max Nesterak.